Hi class, this is lesson 5.5. We're going to talk about division with polynomials. So let's start by reviewing long division. So this is from a while ago. So if I want to divide 112 by 4, I say 4 divided by 112. And you have to think, how many times does 4 go into 11? Well, 4 goes into 11 twice. 2 times 4 is 8. And then we subtract. 11 minus 8 is 3. And then I'm going to move the 2 down. And then we think, how many times does 4 go into 32? And that happens 8 times. So 8 times 4 is 32 exactly. And if we subtract those, 32 minus 32 is 0. So I have a remainder of 0. And so my answer, if you divide 112 by 4, is 28. Let's try a bigger one. So I want to take 5,546. And I want to divide that number by 12. So I think, first of all, how many times does 12 go into 55? Well, it goes in there 4 times. So 4 times 12 is 48. And I'm going to subtract 55 minus 48, which gives me a remainder of 7. So then I pull the 4 down. And I think, how many times does 12 go into 74? Well, it goes in there 6 times. 6 times 12 is 72. And then I'm going to subtract these two. 74 minus 72 is 2. And then I'm going to bring the 6 down. How many times does 12 go into 26? It goes in there twice. 2 times 12 is 24. 26 minus 24 is 2, so I have a remainder now of 2 since I don't have any other numbers to pull down. So my answer is 462, and 2 out of 12 left over. But 2 out of 12 reduces to 1/6, so it's 462 and 1/6. That's my answer. So now we're going to extend this into polynomials, and we're going to do some long division with polynomials. So I want to divide x to the third, I'm going to write that down, minus 5x squared minus 7x plus 2. And I want to divide that whole thing by x minus 2. So what you have to start by thinking is x times what would give you x to the third? Well, that's x squared. So I'm going to put an x squared right here above my x squared term. And then I'm going to multiply. X squared times x gives me x to the third. X squared times a minus 2 is minus 2x squared. So I'm going to subtract just like I did up above. So x to the third minus x to the third is 0. That goes away. Negative 5x squared minus a negative 2x squared leaves me with negative 3x squared. And then I'm going to pull my next term down. So I'm going to pull down minus 7x. So now I've got to look. X times what would give me negative 3x squared? Well, I would have to say x times negative 3x. So I need to multiply this by negative 3x. So negative 3x times x is negative 3x squared. I'm going to write it right here. Then negative 3x times negative 2 is plus 6x. And just like I did before, I'm going to subtract these. So my first terms will cancel. Negative 7x minus 6x is negative 13x. And I need to bring my plus 2 straight down. Now I've got to think, x times what would give me negative 13x? Well, that's times negative 13. So my last is negative 13. Negative 13 times x is negative 13x. So I'm going to write it right here. Negative 13 times negative 2 is plus 26. And then I'm going to subtract this quantity. So negative 13x minus negative 13x is 0. 2 minus 26 is negative 24. There's nothing left to pull down, so I know I have a remainder of negative 24. And so I have a remainder of negative 24. And the way we write that is we'd write it negative 24 over x minus 2, because that's my whole. So my answer here is x squared minus 3x minus 13 plus my remainder, which is negative 24 over x minus 2. And there's my answer. So let's divide the next one. I want to take x plus 3, and I want to divide it into 2x to the third minus x squared, not minus x squared, plus x squared minus 8x plus 5. So I have to think again, what can I multiply x by that would give me 2x to the third? Well, I can multiply it by 2x squared. So I need to put 2x squared at the top. Then I need to say 2x squared times x and write it here. 2x squared times 3 and write it here. So 2x squared times x is 2x to the third. 2x squared times 3 is plus 6x squared. So I'm going to subtract this. 2x to the third minus 2x to the third is 0. X squared minus 6x squared is negative 5x squared. Then I'm going to pull my next term down, minus 8x. Now I'm going to ask, x times what gives me negative 5x squared? Well, that's times negative 5x. So negative 5x times x is negative 5x squared. Negative 5x times 3 is negative 15x. And I'm going to subtract this whole term. So negative 5x squared minus a negative 5x squared is 0. Negative 8x minus a negative 15x gives me positive 7x. And then I need to pull that plus 5 term down. Now I've got to ask, x times what gives me 7x? Well, x times 7. So I'm going to multiply here by plus 7. So I'll write it at the top. 7 times x is positive 7x. 7 times 3 is 21. Now subtract this. 7x minus 7x is 0. 5 minus 21 is negative 16. So my remainder is negative 16. And the way I write my final answer again would be 2x squared minus 5x plus 7. And then my remainder, I'm going to say plus negative 16 out of the whole is x plus 3. So here's how I write my final answer. Now, if you notice here, it says, wouldn't it be great if there were a shorter version of this? Well, there is. Yay! It's called synthetic division. Synthetic division is actually pretty quick and easy. Okay, so there's just a couple tricks you need to remember, though. First of all, you need to have a 0 of the linear polynomial to be able to use synthetic division. So a 0 meaning if I looked at this right here, if this was my expression, negative 3 would make this 0. So I would actually use negative 3 when I was using synthetic division. Positive 2 would make this 0. So I would use positive 2. So we have to use a 0 to do synthetic division. That's the first thing. And then also the thing to remember, synthetic division only uses coefficients. So that's only the numbers right in front of your variables, and it uses our final constant as well. You also need to look for, make sure you have all your powers. So this has x to the third, x to the second, x, and then no variable. If I was missing something, if I went from x to the third just to an x, I would have to plug a 0 for this missing term in here. But for this one, I've got them all right in order. Here I've got them all right in order, so I don't need to worry about adding anything in here. So we're only going to use the coefficients. So my 0 here of x minus 2 would be positive 2. So I have to use positive 2. And for synthetic division, we write our number out there, and then we make this little almost like a half a box thing. Then we put our coefficients here. My coefficient here is 1. So I'm going to write that down. My coefficient here is negative 5. So I've got 1, negative 5. My coefficient here is negative 7. My coefficient here is 2. So synthetic division, what we're going to do is we're going to take this first coefficient and drop it right down to the bottom. Then I'm going to say 2 times 1. Well, I missed my 1 there. So I'm going to say 2 times 1, and that's 2, so I'm going to write my 2 right here. So 2 times 1 is 2. Now I'm going to add negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3. So I'm going to write negative 3 right here. Now I'm going to multiply again. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. It'll go right here. Now I'm going to add again. Negative 6 or negative 7 plus negative 6 is negative 13. I'm going to multiply again. 2 times negative 13 is negative 26. And again, I'm going to add. 2 plus negative 26 gives me negative 24. Now, we need to write in here what our variables will be that go along with it. And since our highest power is x to the third, we need to drop this down 1 and make it x squared. So this will be our x squared term. This will be our x term. This will be our constant term. And the last one will be our remainder. So to write our answer, it's going to be 1x squared, which is just x squared, minus 3x minus 13. And then the way we write our remainder, again, like we did up above, would be plus negative 24 out of x minus 2. And here's my final answer. So let's look at 4b here. My 0 for x plus 3, okay, because I'm going to divide this. I'm going to divide it by this. The 0 here would be negative 3. So I've got to use negative 3 as my 0. I'll write my half of a box. Now I'm going to write all my coefficients. My first coefficient is 2. My next coefficient is 1. My next coefficient is negative 8. And my final coefficient is 5. So again, I drop that first 2 straight down. Then I multiply. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. Add those two together. 1 and negative 6 is negative 5. Again, I'm going to multiply. Negative 3 times negative 5 is positive 15. I'm going to add these two together. Negative 8 plus 15 is 7. Again, multiply. Negative 3 times 7 is negative 21. 5 plus negative 21 is negative 16. Now I've got to think of what are my variables that'll go with it. My highest power to begin with was x to the third, so my first power will be 1 less. This will be my x squared power, this will be my x power, this will be my constant, and this one will be my remainder. So my final answer is 2x squared minus 5x plus 7 plus my remainder is negative 16 out of x plus 3. And here's my final answer. And see, that was much, much quicker using synthetic division than it is using long division. So let's flip our page over and see where we will use this some more. All right, so we're going to actually use synthetic division when we're finding the zeros. So my direction here says find the zeros by dividing g of x. Here's my expression. If x equals negative 2 is a 0. So I know that negative 2 is a 0. And I want to use synthetic division here. So I'm going to write all my coefficients. First coefficient is 3. That's from x to the third. My next is negative 4. That goes to x squared. My next is negative 28. And my constant is negative 16. So using synthetic division, I'll drop that first coefficient all the way down. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Negative 4 plus negative 6 is negative 10. Multiply again. Negative 2 times negative 10 is positive 20. Negative 28 plus 20 is negative 8. Negative 2 times negative 8 is positive 16. Negative 16 plus 16 is 0. So I know that this is my x squared term. Here's my x term, and here's my constant, and my remainder is 0. And if you know a number is a 0, then your remainder should be 0, because a 0 tells us that it goes into the equation evenly. So I now have 3x squared minus 10x minus 8, and this equals 0. So what I can do to find more zeros, because I've now really simplified that a little further, is I can factor this. So let's think of the snip method for factoring. And we're going to have to use this method because a is 3. I've got a number other than 1 for a. So we have to think what multiplies to give us ac that adds up to b. Well, a times c is negative 24, and it needs to add up to negative 10. So thinking of our numbers, 1 times 24, if I make one of those negative, it won't be negative, it won't add up to negative 10. 2 times 12. Now wait a second, if I make one of those negative, that's going to add up to 10, to negative 10. So I have 2 and 12. And if I make 12 negative, that'll add up to negative 10. So using this method of factoring, we should know now we divide both sides by our a, which is 3, with the variable. Now this first one, that one's already simplified. So we know that's 3x plus 2. The second one, 3 goes into both, so it becomes negative 4 over x. So that one is really x minus 4. And there's my factored forms. So now I just need to find my zeros for each one of them. So we can say 3x plus 2 equals 0, and x minus 4 equals 0. So this 0, if I add 4 to both, x equals 4, there's one of my zeros. Here, subtract 2 from both, I have 3x equals negative 2, divide them both by 3, x equals negative 2/3. So there's another 0, and my 0 that they told me to begin with is x equals negative 2. So there are my 3 zeros. So I have 3 zeros there. My power was 3, so I've got 3 zeros. That makes sense, doesn't it? If we have a power of 3, we need 3 zeros. So let's look at number 7 here. It says find the other zeros by dividing this if h of 3 equals 0. Well, this is function notation, and remember, usually have an x in here, they put 3 in for x, so that's telling me 3 is a 0. So 3 is what I need to divide into my expression. So I'm using my coefficients now of h of x. My first coefficient is 1 times x to the third. My second is negative 2, x squared. My third is negative 23x, and my fourth is positive 60. So synthetic division tells me drop the first coefficient down, then multiply. 3 times 1 is 3. Add those together. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. Now multiply again. 3 times 1 is 3. Negative 23 plus 3 is negative 20. And let's multiply again. 3 times negative 20 is negative 60. 60 plus negative 60 is 0. So again, my first term, my highest power up above was x to the third. So my first term is x squared, my second is my plain x, my third is my constant, and my final is my remainder. So this, once I divide the 0, 3 into it, gives me x squared plus x minus 20, and that equals 0. Now this is a nice easy one to factor. You can think, what multiplies to give you 20 that adds up to 1? Well, doesn't positive 5 actually times negative 4. That'll multiply to give me negative 20 and add up to 1. And I know this is just x times x. So this factors into x plus 5 times x minus 4 equals 0. So my two zeros here are x equals negative 5 and x equals positive 4. And up above, I was told that x equals 3 is also a 0. So there are my 3 zeros. My power was 3. This was a polynomial of degree 3. So I should have 3 zeros. So it's correct. Let's try one more problem. Okay. And on the back page, I didn't mention this. I skipped a problem. I skipped number 5 on the previous side. We're not doing that one. So you could just cross that out. I didn't mention it before. Sorry about that. But we're just skipping that one altogether. We're not worrying about that problem. So you could just cross that one out. All right, let's do this last problem right here. It says if negative 7 is a 0, find the other zeros of this function. So negative 7 is my 0. That's what I'm going to divide into. My first coefficient is 1, x to the third. My second is negative 3. My third is negative 45. And my final is 175. So I'm going to drop that one straight down. Negative 7 times 1 is negative 7. Negative 3 plus negative 7 is negative 10. Let's multiply again. Negative 7 times negative 10 is positive 70. Negative 45 plus 70 is 25. Negative 7 times 25 is negative 175. And if you add those last two together, we get 0. So our first term is our x squared term. Our second is our x term. Our third is our constant, and our final is our remainder. And again, since negative 7 is a 0, it goes in there evenly. We have no remainder. So this really factors into x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 0. I shouldn't say it factors into it, simplifies into that. Now, we're looking for our zeros still, so we need to factor this one. So what can multiply to give you 25 that adds up to negative 10? Well, negative 5 times negative 5, doesn't that add up to negative 10? Here, I can split that up into x times x. So this is really x minus 5 times x minus 5 equals 0. We could also think of that as x minus 5, the quantity squared, equals 0. And really, that looks like vertex form, doesn't it? Looks like vertex form because it really is vertex form. So if you think about it, negative 5 is the x-coordinate of a vertex, 0 is the y-coordinate of a vertex. So this tells us this, when we graph it, is going to be at the vertex, so at the very top or at the very bottom of a parabola. So what this is, it's called a double zero. We have it really twice. It counts twice. So x equals positive 5 is a 0. And that's, as I said, called a double zero. What it'll do, it'll just touch the x-axis when we're graphing. Our function will just touch the x-axis right there. So that's one of our zeros. The other 0 is given. It's x equals negative 7. So 5 counts as 2 of our zeros. Negative 7 is the third 0. So this is the end of this lesson. Please make sure if you have any questions, you star them so we can talk about them in class, and have a great night.